Without the slightest shadow of doubt, the Croatian Adriatic, with its 1,185 islands, islets, reefs and rocks, and all the ins and outs of its remarkably variegated coastline, can be proclaimed a mariner's dream destination. And dreams in this gorgeous Mediterranean archipelago have a knack of constantly turning into reality. The fairy tale islands and coves just have to be sailed. We've devoted this edition of the Dream Point video guide to the Central Adriatic. We're going to sail together from romantic Premuda Island southwards, via that seafarer's Eden, the Kornati Group, then the stirring destinations in the Šibenik archipelago, down to gentle Šolta, and in our second video pilot, the coast and interior of Istria are dealt with, together with the northern Adriatic islands, while the third pilot of the southern Adriatic reveals the many secret pleasures of a voyage from Brač to illustrious Dubrovnik. The Central Adriatic, the topic of this video pilot, offers sailors two attractive national parks: the Kornati, that legendary must-see of a park, and the Falls of Krka Park, which you can enjoy by sailing down to Skradin. Add to that Telaščica Nature Park, the tropical feel of the island of Vrgada, the quaint little Mediterranean harbours in Zlarin, Žirje and Drvenik, and many other hidden pleasures meant for all receptive travellers. But if we wanted to summarise for the pleasure-loving mariner the most intriguing feature of sailing in the Central Adriatic, then the magic word is the bay. The island bays and coves of the Central Adriatic are graced with charms that can hardly be ascribed to any other Mediterranean archipelago. Those who like taking a peek at the underwater world as well as sailing will also be able to relish the diversity of the Central Adriatic. For divers, we might recommend the Sunken Ship and Underwater Cavern off Premuda, the gorgeous underwater spots on the southern side of Dugi Otok, the striking underwater menu of the Kornati Islands, and an attractive spot not far off the western coast of Žirje. The gourmet fare of the Central Adriatic is a hedonist story on its own. Here you'll find fresh seafood with a vernacular touch, like Kornati brudet, half-baked fish, cod, octopus and shrimp in a dozen ways. Before eating, it's worth tasting some of the best Adriatic herbal grappas, but more of this later, while those who are particularly avid for secrets of the kitchen might want to look up another of our videos, the wide-ranging gourmet guide to the Croatian Adriatic. And something about the sailing conditions along this part of the coast. In the Central Adriatic, the prevailing summer wind is a pleasant maestral that rarely spoils the pleasure of sailing. In the winter, you have to pay due respect to the gusts of the cyclonic Bora, while the Sirocco will sometimes show its strength on islands exposed to the open sea. Ploča Point, 2 nautical miles from Rogoznica, is a kind of climatic point of division of the Adriatic, and the weather will quite often change character just round here. There are slightly bigger differences between high and low tide than in the south, but they are still practically negligible. You have to take care of the currents only in the Mala and Velika Proversa Straits, and in the channel between the mainland and the island of Murter. In the central part of the Adriatic, you can take advantage of the safety and services of a dozen island and mainland marinas. Refuelling is a bit more tricky, for among the islands you can find a pump only occasionally. But let's be on our way in our exploration of this paradisal archipelago and sail to Premuda, the island with which that part of the Adriatic called Dalmatia begins. Premuda is a part of the Zadar archipelago and is exposed to the open sea. We are going to stop in the port of Krial, which many hold to be one of the most beautiful in the whole of the Adriatic, and which we have called our first Central Adriatic Dream Point destination. The group of rocks jointly called Masarina give some protection against winds and high seas, and create a pretty little lagoon in which there are a number of buoys to tie up at. In this harbour, with its typically Mediterranean feel, it's worth disembarking and taking a turn to the village on the hilltop, where you'll have the idea time has really stood still. but the hands will start moving again when you're served half-baked scorpion fish on the terrace of the Masarina Tavern by the sea. When you sail out of Crial, halt a while in the bays of Premuda, Zaporat and Shiroka, and then push on to the neighbouring island of Shkarda, anchoring and bathing in the pretty cove called Griparica on the south of the island, where at the head of the bay the mansion of Hungarian aristocrats has been refurbished. The islands of Ist and Molat are the next on our journey southward home. Unlike the two previous islands, Ist is fairly thickly settled, and if you sail towards it, a good mark is the little church of Our Lady of Snow, raised on the island's highest hill. If you take passage round the island, spacious Kosiracha Bay will offer you a good haven from southerly and easterly winds. It has numerous little jetties and fishermen's stores, and from here to the main place on the island it's a mere 10 minutes walk. And if you then sail round the northern side of the island, in Zapuntel Strait between Ist and Molat, it's not a bad idea to have a swim in Mliaka Bay, where the local people have anchored a few buoys. The main port of the island is in Shiroka Bay, where there are several fixed anchorage points marked by buoys as well as a quay. In friendly Ist, it's a good idea to take a stroll along the coastal paths to the church we mentioned, Our Lady of Snow, and also to drop in at the Katie restaurant for a hearty fish soup. We'll start our cruise round Molat from Zapuntel Strait, where there's a pretty little anchorage in the harbour of the same name. Then off along the southern side to spacious, mariner-friendly Burgulski Bay. There's a nice little anchorage by Burgulat's Islet, and you can tie up to the side pier in Burgulia harbour. Take a look at the tropical shop in the quay, stroll by the hill to Burgulia itself, buy some terrific sheep's cheese in oil from the locals, have a bird's eye view of the whole bay, or commune in the high point of the local day, the arrival of the regular ship from Zadar. There are not quite 2 miles of sailing to the next bay, Lucina, and the town of Molat. Here a newly built pier offers a good mooring, and after you've had a look at a quaint house with a tower on the coast, take a walk over to the pretty little village on a nearby hill. Or you could opt for a swim in nearby Yazi Bay, Molat's town's other harbour, located on the northern side of the island. In the next part of the cruise southwards, we'll cut through Sedmovracha and stop at Zverinats Island, taking in pretty little Kablin Bay, and then tie up with the help of a fixed anchorage point at the jetty in the village of Zverinats. It's not a bad idea to take a walk along the main street to the church, looking into the occasional courtyard and trying the fresh fish at Bozhidar Shkifich's restaurant, grilled, baked on the hearth or in salt. As we sail on, we'll anchor a while in the beautiful Dumbachitsa Bay on the southern side of neighbouring Sestrin and have a swim, after which we'll set out again on our central Adriatic voyage of exploration. If we come into Ij, island of ancient name and rich tradition from the southwest, then it's worth watching out for the pleasantly sheltered spot off the islands of Sridny and Glurovich, although anchoring is restricted because of the sea bass aquafarms found here. If we head off behind Osilyanats Point along the north coast of the island, after a couple of miles we'll come into Veli Ij, the biggest village on the island with a handy marina and a long tradition of potting. This cultivated little place offers walks in picturesque streets, and if you get peckish, drop in at Captain Raiko's for a great octopus salad seasoned with his own Doppio Vergina olive oil. Mali, or small Ij, located behind Kinezhak Islet, is also worth a visit, but perhaps we ought to head our mariners off to the next dream point destination, the lovely Vodinyak Bay, idyllic bathing place well sheltered from both Bora and Mistral. Continuing our wanders round the central Adriatic, we've got to skip back a bit to the west to make a conscientious introduction to Dugi Otok, a place with a name that fits it well, Long Island, bounded by the familiar straits of Sedmovrace and Proversa. On its outer, very largely inaccessible side, we managed to find an enjoyable bathing spot in the lovely bay of Sakharun, while the rest of the coast is wide open to the sea and marked by impressive cliffs. The tallest Croatian lighthouse, Veli Rat by name, is a sign that we're coming close to Luka Soliščica and the neighbouring, well-nigh surreal bay of Pantera, fitted with a large number of buoys at which to tie up. Here, as well as swimming, it's not a bad idea to disembark in Veli Rat village and stroll over to the lighthouse and the pleasant surrounding strands. Nevertheless, the safest thing is to anchor in the lake-like calm of the next cove, called Tuna. If we set off behind the islet of Bršćak, we'll find ourselves on the northwest side of Dugi Otok, where, having slipped past pleasant Muljakovac Bay, we can tie up at the jetty in Bojava, which is graced by delightful surrounding woods and nice bathing spots. Sailing further southwards, we'll pass tunnels for naval ships, Dumboka Cave, the haven in Bokashin, the car ferry port of Lukashin Bay, the coastal village of Burbin, and then we can make a brief stopover on the pretty island of Rava with its several picturesque bays and havens. And so here we are once again on Dugi Otok, where it's really worth one's while stopping in the charming little place called Luka, in which the standard Mediterranean atmosphere is given by the characteristic shade, fishermen's nets, shutters, and narrow little streets. After Žmanščica Bay and the gentle mooring by Krknata Islet, we can sail past the only island filling station in Zaglav harbour, and then tie up in the fishing port of Sali, where we can visit the local church or laze on the popular town loungery. But not even this is the end to this long island. We will press on south then, past the anchorage in Čuščica, right the way down to the famed nautical strait of Mala Proversa, so as to sail into a real natural sensation, the biggest of all Adriatic bays and a logical dream point destination for this pilot, Telaščica Nature Park. One really has to surrender oneself to this place because it exceeds all expectations and is also one of the securest havens in the Adriatic. We will take you on a systematic look around with special accents on Čuška Inlet, Mir Bay, a walk to the Salt Lake, and the surrounding hills that give fabulous views. Just before the setting of the sun, one should set off towards the outer side of the island, past Taljurić Rock, and sail below some very impressive cliffs, the popular Golden Cliffs, which will make a splendid closure to your look round Dugi Otok. The 93 islands, islets and rocks of the Kornati National Park are crammed with beauty and contradictions. The Kornati are said to be bare, although there are olive groves and various kinds of herbs there. They are also said to be uninhabited, although the Kumatars, or the Mutarians that is, the real owners, have built houses in some 50 bays and devised the first Robinson Crusoe holidays on the Adriatic. The indigenous breed of sheep is a byword for the art of survival, and though it's said they get by on seawater, the fact is that they find fresh water in the hollows and caves. Well, come what may, the beauty and structure of the Kornati Isles make them a unique island group in the Mediterranean, and there's no way you should miss out on them if you ever sail the Adriatic. Let's start exploring from the northwest of Katina Island, that separates the group from Dugiotok. In Katina, a well-known place for sailors' get-togethers, do tie up at Kodsporke Mari's very tidy jetty. Clamber up to the nearby hills that afford nice views, get to know the eloquent parrot Kokolo, and then at Mara's try, for example, tasty monkfish broudettes. Between Katina and Kornat Island itself, there is another well-known strait used for getting into and out of the archipelago, Vela Proversa. After that, we'll look up the awe-inspiring Sestritsa lighthouse. There are only a few lights in Kornati, which means it's not very advisable to make night voyages. There is hardly an island or cove in the Kornati one would want to miss, but it's certainly necessary to make an effort to stop on Levernaka, which on its northern side has an excellently protected bay of the same name, while on the south is a marvellous bathing spot in Loyana Bay. More or less across the way from Levernaka on Kornati Island itself are the Shipnata and Lučica bays, and to the south another exceptionally attractive spot, an outlying island called Mana, which has terrific cliffs, a nice bathing site, and the rather twee remains of film sets. Here we are once again back on Kornat, from Kravljačica Bay to the only real settlement on the island, Vrulja. There are 3 quaint streets, sociable donkeys and strange wedding customs. It's a good idea to tie up at the jetty next to Antayerat's tavern and try a great homemade herb grappa, and then octopus prepared in any of a number of ingenious ways. From Vrulja we go off to Lopatica Bay, and then off to the open sea again to what is for many the most beautiful marina in the Adriatic, located alongside the islet of Pescara Channel. From the marina, do try a walk up to the top of the hill, where you can get an attractive view of the surrounding archipelago. Take the dinghy to Pescara Island and visit the little church of Our Lady of the Angels. In these Kornati wanderings, think of visiting the pleasant anchorage and bathing spot of Lavca Island, where you can find a sundial on the beach, the odd fisherman, a leisurely angler, and a table for 2. The port of Ravnijakan Islet provides a good haven and the largest jetty in the Kornati. After this, sail round the protected reserve of Purara Islet. However, you can't land because of the rare wild chard that grows only here. From Purara, we'll set sail for the pleasant Bay of Opat, on the very western end of Kornat, which we have, for many sound reasons, placed among the dream point destinations of the central Adriatic. You can choose between tying up at several buoys and a proper jetty. After swimming in the lovely bay, walk up to the peak of the nearby hill, where your reward will be some very attractive views, and then set out on the culinary exploration of Opat restaurant, where the creative cook, Captain Bozhikov, will offer you fresh lobster, clams and warm rolls, or bubitsa, from the bread oven, or perhaps scampi in a sauce of dried John Dory roe. We'll go on with our wanderings in Kornati with a visit to Smokvica Vela Island, where you can tie stern first to the pier, swim in some marvellously clear sea, look around the surroundings, and have a delicious lunch in the shade of the Piccolo restaurant. The northern side of Kornat has none of the indebtedness of the rest, and so we'll only stop off at Stineva Bay, where you'll be surprised by the spoiled and sociable local sheep. After that, we'll furl our Kornati sail in the pleasant anchorage of Stavica Bay and Svršeta Islet. Although its Croatian name would tend to suggest so, the island of Žut is not actually yellow. Actually, for many sailors, it's one of the most beautiful islands in the central Adriatic. We'll first sail along the southern side and stop at pretty Jagodna Bay, and then continue on to the western end of the island and a pleasant anchorage in Pinizel Bay, which is protected from the north winds by Pinizelic Islet. The next bay, Bizigovica, is a kind of introduction to the spacious and, nautically speaking, very attractive Luka Žut, in which there are many hidden surprises. The bay's west inlet is dominated by the attractive ACI marina and surrounding restaurants, while in the eastern inlet in Strunac Bay you can tie up at one of the several buoys placed in front of the commendable Bine restaurant, where Vjeko, fisherman and master chef, prepares cod in a dozen imaginative ways. Voyaging on to the east, we'll sail into the Žut Dream Point destination, the very sheltered Hiljacha Bay, known for its well-organised castaway tourism, and to the lovely spot at its western end, Sabuni Bay, in front of Gustat's Islet, in which you can tie up at any one of the buoys placed there, not missing out on a visit to the tavern of hospitable Edo Juraga, where the whole family gets busy with your dinner. In Sabuni, there's an inquisitive Dalmatian checking out what kind of fish there is. The youngest, Franes, specialises in whitebait, while the older members of the family are masters of brudette and the charcoal grill. Ugljan, thanks to the immediate vicinity of Zadar, is one of the most populated of Adriatic islands. We'll start our voyage round it from the uninhabited southern side, where we'll look in at pretty Prtljug Bay, with its quaint little port, and then go along the inaccessible coast right to the eastern end and the spacious Bay of Sabušica, that offers a nice anchorage and a bathing spot. Next, we'll pass through Mali Zdrelac, one of the busiest of the inter-island straits that divides the bridge-linked islands of Ugljan and Pashman. But we can pass through the strait only if our mast isn't any taller than 16 metres. For a little while we'll anchor and bathe in the well-sheltered Zdrelac port and take a look at the Church of Our Lady of Snow, and then carry on to nearby Kukljica, the first settlement on the northern side of the island. Kukljica, in which you can tie up at the western pier, is a popular tourist and weekend cottage centre of Ugljan, and you'll find somewhat more built-up scenes, while the next village, the renowned fishing centre called Kali, shows a somewhat more indigenous picture. One of the finest destinations round here has to be Ošljak Islet, which you'll come across as you go on to the west. In this attractive village you can tie up in a sheltered harbour on the north, and then you can walk along the island paths or simply look down into the sea from some terrace. The next Ugljan destination, Preko, which, like Kali, also has two harbours, is worth a visit because of one of the islets called Galavac. There is a fine Franciscan monastery on it, a church, a strange model, and pretty beaches. If we go on to the western end of Ugljan, the lighthouse on Sveti Gurgo Point is a sign that we're about to enter the wide bay of Sutomyštica, while behind the next point lies the charming little village of Lukuran and its bay. As we sail on, we'll come upon the occasional pleasant strand and then finish our tour around the island in Ugljan town, where we can tie up to the main pier and take a dip in the charming little bay to the west of the town. Like its neighbour Uglian, Pashman is inhabited along the northeast coast, but to sail near it you have to keep your eye on the chart and skirt round the many shoals. Looking round this side of the island, we'll stop first in Pashman town, where in the lee of the pier you will come across the 100-year-old boat, the Katarina, and the occasional, even older stone house in the town. In the neighbouring town of Krai, any yacht with a fairly deep draft will find it hard to tie up in the little harbour in front of the monastery. But then it will be able to find a mooring on the eastern side of the pier in nearby Tkon, in which, if you want the mainland, you can take the ferry to Beograd. For many of those who sail the seas, the finest point in Pashman is attractive Zaklopica Bay, located right at the eastern end of the island. If you go on along the southern, nautically rather more provocative coast, you'll find a pleasant anchorage and mussel bed by Zizan Islet, while you can take shelter from any fairly gusty Bora or Mistral in Landin and Jinchena Bays. The best shelter and several buoys are to be found in pretty and spacious Solina Bay, in which many a mariner is happy to spend the night for the sake of the peace and safety. And during the summer, you'll really have to come in slightly early if you want to find a buoy free. We'll finish our trip round Pashman with a visit to the bays of Kobilyak and Chelinya, and then sail on to discover new island secrets of the central Adriatic. On our way from Pashman to the southeast, we'll make a brief stop at the anchorage and swimming place near Gangaro Islet, and then go on to the smallish island of Vergada, which for its many indigenous beauties we have proclaimed the next dream point destination of this archipelago. If we voyage to Vergada from Gangaro, we'll first be met on the western coast by Sveti Andrea Bay, in which, however, you have to pay great attention to shallows and plus signs on the chart. Sailing on to the main island village of Luka, you also have to keep your distance from the coast, and in the town itself, if you don't decide to anchor off Artina Islet, you can tie up at the central pier and then take in the unique Mediterranean atmosphere. Here made up of the picturesque little port, tiny streets and churches, young football fans, and somewhat more elderly meditators. A voyage along the northern coast will bring us to the lovely wooded bay of Kranja. If the weather is nice, don't dream of leaving the archipelago without visiting the tropical bathing places and anchorages around Mrvinjak Islet, because it's here that you'll really understand why we put Vergada in our and your list of dream points. Murter, the biggest of the Šibenik group, is one of those rare Adriatic islands that, because of the moving bridge that links it to the mainland, has lost the formal status of an island. In the Murter Channel and among the eastern islets, you have to pay close attention to the chart and watch out for shoals. While Murter is something of a trendsetter in the Adriatic by having as many as 3 marinas on its northern coast. It's also interesting to mention that as many as 189 Adriatic islands are privately owned by the Murterians. 1 out of every 6, in fact. Hardly surprising, then, that in the island harbours you will still find boat builders who make the traditional wooden Murter Gaieta. We'll start the trip round Murter from the westernmost port, Hramina, enhanced by a marina, a small shipyard, and a well-known gourmet centre, the Tic Tac restaurant, where, with traditional delicacies from the baker's oven, you can try carpaccio of prized Adriatic tuna. And if you visit Hramina, do take a walk or drive to the older town of Murter on a nearby hill, where more than anywhere else you'll be able to feel part of the authentic island atmosphere. In the following town, Betina, lies the island's second marina, a pretty harbour and a boatyard. You can also buy good local wine and olive oil. The youngest island town, Tisno, is split by a movable bridge that lets mariners through twice a day. And not far from Tisno is Jezera, with the third marina, famous for its Adriatic Nautical Academy and its organised angling trips for pelagic fish. The southeast side of the island, as usual almost uninhabited, offers yachtsmen many a charming bay. And we'll take a look in at Koromashna, Kosirna, Vucigrađe, Slanica, and the bathing spot near Školjić Peninsula, in order to finish our Murta voyage with a visit to the attractive lighthouse on Prishňák Islet. Žiria is the furthest outpost of the Šibenik archipelago, and on the southern side you could feel well you're at the beginning or at the end of the world. Once again, the settlements are located at the northeast side of the island, and we'll start our survey from Koromashna Bay, then visit the fairly well-protected Muna, port for Žiria village, where you can tie up alongside a longish pier. We'll stop a while at the last possible refuge this side of the island, Mikavica Bay, and then move on to the more interesting, for mariners, southwest coast and sail into the attractive Tratinska Bay, where friendly fishermen often stay the night and where you had best anchor in the little northeastern end in some 6 meters of water. Sailors fond of adventure and the open sea can be recommended a trip to the outlying lighthouse of Blitvenica Islet, and then to the nicest bay in the island, the next dream point destination of the central Adriatic, Vela Stupica. Here you're protected from all winds except from the south, and for those who don't like dropping anchor, there are a dozen buoys to tie up at. In this bay, apart from swimming and relaxing, you could well visit the Justinian fortification dating from the 6th century and keep your strength up in this informal, family-owned gastronomic point. We'll look briefly into neighbouring Mala Stupica and then say farewell to Žiria and head off in search of new beauties in the Šibenik archipelago. Whether it's because they are so close or for some other less defined reason, the islands of Kakan and Kapria are often experienced as one. Although uninhabited, Kakan offers sailors an unusually beautiful anchorage and tranquility in Potkućina Bay, where the inhabitants of Kapria have placed buoys and carry on a casual daily trade in fruit and wine. On neighbouring and much more indented Kapria, it's very pleasant at quiet times to anchor and swim in Ostrava Bay, on the western end, while you can shelter from the Bora in Remetic and Vanjska Bays on the southwest coast. And yet, the most attractive spot on this island has to be the village of Kapria itself, where, after the regular daily ship has arrived, you can tie up to the pier and then walk along the picturesque little streets or up to the top of the hill, which gives an impressive view of neighbouring Nosdra Bay. If you get hungry, in the village a good choice is the traditional family-run tavern Bilojaje, owned by Nikola Radovčić, who's been in the trade for some 25 years, and you won't go far wrong if you opt for his fried whitebait or brodetto, perhaps accompanied by tomato salad with homegrown capers. If we sail from Kapria towards Šibenik, we'll come upon the uninhabited island of Zmajan, where you can halt a while and swim in pleasant Smetnja Bay. Within easy reach of the Šibenik Channel, there are 3 islands, Tijat, Prvić and Zlarin. We'll drop in first at uninhabited Tijat, whose eastern side conceals one of the nicest bays of the archipelago, Tjaščica by name, popular haunt of Šibenik sailors. Neighbouring Prvić, instead of uninhabited bays, offers 2 pretty villages. Šepurina is more original as well as less sheltered. You might run into some non-professional divers in it. While in Luka, you can tie up to a longish pier and then give yourself over to swimming from the local beaches. The last island of the trio, Zlarin, is a kind of combination of the previous 2, because it has both populated areas and uninhabited coves. Little Zlarin town on the western end of the island is a well-known centre for coral, and this attractive marine item is still worked here today with traditional love and respect. In Zlarin town, it's worth walking over to the Baroque parish church and strolling in the charming little harbour. The island bays have somehow all congregated on the northeast coast. We'll take a look into a few and finish our tour in the widest and prettiest, Magarna. An unrepeatable sailing experience is the voyage to our first mainland dream point destination in the central Adriatic, the town of Skradin. From the fort in the channel of Sveti Ante, past Šibenik, going under the Adriatic Highway Bridge, sailing down a surreal gash in the landscape down to Proklansko Lake, and finally to Skradin itself, there is scene after scene that no holiday-making sailor will ever forget. Skradin is quite simply extremely attractive. There are many reasons, and we'll mention just a few of the most prominent. In Skradin, there is the only Adriatic freshwater marina. In the streams around the place, eels have taken the place of lobster and bass. It is a logical jumping-off place for the cascades on the river, deep in the inland hills. It yet retains the charm of the Mediterranean. A 10-minute boat tour will bring you to the natural oasis of the Falls of Krka National Park, while a visit to the Skradin area would be incomplete without calling in at picturesque Visovac Islet, ruled by peace, harmony and peacocks. The gourmet will come into his own on Skradin too. Don't miss out on Skradin dried ham, the traditional Skradin risotto, local wines including Debit and Maraschino, or the Tony Tavern, a gastronomic nook where the kindly host will make you an excellent shrimp buzera or a dish of Skradin eels. To sail to the lowest lying of all the inhabited islands of the Adriatic, Krapine, located just opposite the mainland's Brodarica, you have to make your approach from the west, because there are shoals everywhere around. Once having tied up, stroll over to see the local church and monastery and visit the sponges, traditional on the island. Sailing to the south, it's a good idea to stop off at one more mainland spot, the charming village on the Primošten Peninsula, where hospitable Share will catch hold of your line on the western pier. In Primošten, walk up to the top of the peninsula and to the church, have a swim from the pleasant beaches, and visit the culinary corner of the Dalmatia restaurant, where that master of his craft, Vinko Bolancha, prepares very creative seafood delicacies like tagliatelle verde alla Dalmatia. Before returning to the islands, let's call in for a moment at a charming, well-sheltered Rogoznica, with its handsome, well-set-up Frappa Marina. So our sail has brought us to the two Drveniks, Mali and Veli, or Little and Big, which, with neighbouring Shoulder, make up the last island sequence of this Dream Point video. On the way to these islands, we'll be greeted by one more faithful guardian of sailors, the light on the islet of Murvica. And then it's off to Mali Drvenik and the spacious southern bay of Rina. We'll start our sail round Drvenik Veli from the southwestern bay of Malo Luka, where you'll come upon hard-working tuna fishermen who will probably let you have a tasty Adriatic tuna from the hatcheries and aqua farms. The village of Drvenik Veli itself is one more appealing island representative of the Croatian Mediterranean, and you can tie up stern first to the breakwater or the very end of the main pier and walk along streets that gladden both eye and spirit. You'll come upon a little nautical paradise on the extreme eastern point of the island, in a lovely anchorage and swimming spot close by Krkinjaš Islet, where the colour of the sea speaks louder than words. If we head from Drvenik along the coast and enter wide Trogir Bay, we'll eventually fetch up in Trogir, unarguably one of the loveliest of Adriatic coastal towns. The magic word for mooring here goes ACI Marina, and when you have come to rest in this safe spot, do have a look round this Mediterranean jewel of a town. Start off with the main waterfront and go on with Camalongo Tower, the portals into the old city centre, the city square, the must-see cathedral with its famed Romanesque portal by Master Radovan. Trogir is heady and interesting when the sun goes down too, and don't sail from it before you've sampled the nightlife. Trogir Bridge, which in recent times no longer opens for shipping, has turned the island of Chiovo into a part of the mainland. But we'll go on with our sail and look into the sheltered Razatinelets Bay, on the southwest coast of this island in Saldoun Bay, while on the southern coast we have opted for a visit to the pleasant anchorage of Sveta Fumia Bay. And so we have come to the end of our journey round the central Adriatic at picturesque Scholta, which, like many of our islands, is inhabited only round the northeast coast. And so we'll head first for the island ports and take a look at the easternmost, Maslinica, jostled by its mass of little islands, and then go on to the east and nearby Shipcover Bay. After it, one should sail along an inaccessible coastline right to the ferry port of Rogac, from which there is a road to the central village in the island, Grohote, which is worth a visit because of its attractive vineyards, self-taught painters, miraculous fig trees, and carob growers. The next and most spacious bay in the island is Nechuyam, which offers a few handy inlets for anchoring. Watch out in the deepest of them, Pishkera, because under the water you'll find it hard to spot the remains of the walls of Emperor Diocletian's fish pond. Further on, the lighthouse on Pellegrin Point will tell you of the entry into lovely Stomorska port, in which you can tie up at the western quay, and then once again enjoy Mediterranean scenes and the good island cooking of the Nevera Tavern. Many will agree that Stomorska is Scholta's most charming village, and almost all that the place to look after the inner man is in the Nevera, where you'll be pleasantly surprised by the reasonable prices of fine fish, cuttlefish risotto, or sea bass, poached or grilled, as well as by the hospitality of the Novakoviches, the owners. If you pass through Splitska Vrata, at the very beginning of the southern coast you'll be met by the gentle little cove of Livka, and after that, one called Velerava. The whole of the southern coast is marked by pretty bays, and we'll sail into Strachinska, Tatynia, Zaglav, Pogaritsa, and finally into the most secure and, in the opinion of our commission, the handsomest of all, Scholta Bay, Sheshula, on the very westernmost point of the island. In this episode 2, we have decided to make things a bit easier for sailors who intend to cruise the central Adriatic to choose between the many attractive places to go. And so we have thought up 2 Dream Point routes that we think will meet all your expectations. A week's charter from Zadar or Murta. If you head off on a 7-day cruise from Zadar or Murta, we recommend you combine the unspoiled nautical paradise of the Kornati Islands with some Mediterranean harbours with plenty of mood. It's true that this permutation still misses out on individual jewels like Skradin, Trogir and Scholta, but you can overcome this omission if you decide on a 2-week stay. From Zadar. Day 1, the harbour of Zhut. Day 2, Smokvica. Day 3, Vrulje, Kornat. Day 4, Telaščica Bay, Dugi Otok. Day 5, Veli Ij. Day 6, Pantere Bay, Dugi Otok. From Murte, Day 1, Capria. Day 2, Stupica Bay, Žirie. Day 3, Opat Bay, Kornat. Day 4, Levernaka. Day 5, Sabuni Bay, Jut. And Day 6, Vergada. Well, here we are once again nearing the end of another Dreampoint video. This time too, of course, we'll say goodbye with some music, a version of an old Dalmatian song. The video pilot to the Central Adriatic will regularly be brought up to date, and we would like to remind regular viewers and buyers about the Dreampoint Club, which exists for lovers of the sea, harbours, islands and bays. Just send us a note by email or fax with your comments, and the most loyal members can expect future prizes and reductions. So, to all mariners and other lovers of the Croatian Adriatic, we wish you fair seas and bon voyage.
Druge ne bi, druge ne bi poželi. Cesarica